What's going on, everybody? This is James Grandmaster Facts Voice, and you are here for another episode of the Facts Project podcast. Today, very special guest, Jordan Clark. We are here to talk about Ancestral Recall, this brand new trade paperback book for Ahoy Comics. Definitely wanted to dive into this, so thank you for being here, sir.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. So I wanted to dive in because the fact of somewhere this book blends a lot of intricate things, where it's been Afrofuturism, comedy, which you've actually added a lot of elements of that, sci-fi. What was essentially like the spark that made you realize that this story had to exist in comic form?
Sure. Yeah. So myself and Adigan, the artist on the book, were privileged enough to be part of the Milestone Initiative from DC Comics a couple years back. And so while we were there, we did a lot of incredible things. We got to meet like Dennis Cowan and meet, Reginald Hudlin and like a lot of the original Milestone people and work on a couple of different things together. And one of the things they had us do was like a character creation, workshop where we're working on, different like heroes and villains that could, be possible, like Milestone stuff.
Yeah.
And like the inspiration for Melvin came there because I was thinking, okay, like if I could do a Milestone character, if like they let me do an original Milestone thing, just thinking about a lot of the roots and the elements of what Milestone represented, like having a hero whose whole power set and ability was like directly coming from Black history, felt like it would fit naturally into that world. And so, when I had an opportunity to pitch something to Ahoy for not just like a creator and book for them, but like my first creator and book, period, like I felt this was the appropriate way to go because it felt like so many things were coming together when you read the book. I mean, there's all the elements that you said, and then there's also elements of, we're talking about AI, we're talking about, the way that Black art is represented, and, the importance of Black history. And I feel like those things got more and more,
Yeah.
like relevant as, we're working on it. And so, that was kind of the genesis for everything, was that workshop.
Yeah, and even outside of that, when you talk about the Milestone Initiative, I know that you basically had a little bit of a paragraph in there for Joseph Village as well.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
how his correspondence, of course, he was probably one of the people that you more so wanted to introduce the book to kind of get like that cosign, be like, look, this is what I've been working on. I would really like for you, I really would like for you to kind of like put like a stamp on this before I put this out into the world.
Yeah, I mean, I've known Joseph for a while, and so he's been incredibly supportive of not just me, but so many different people trying to find their way in the industry. And I think he's one of the most important voices that we have right now, just because he is he's in on the comics. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This isn't anything else for him. Like, he's not trying to get you a movie deal or whatever. Like, he launched his whole new business, which is about like, how can you get your comic IP into something that is like profitable for you, not just the companies, but like, you yourself can create something that's like, sustainable for you. And so, he's always been giving, advice to myself and so many other people. So to have him be, the voice introducing it, not only is just somebody who was there, in the Milestone days, but also is still, a significant voice in comics today, was, very cool for us.
That's absolutely how I picture him, because the couple times where I've had to talk to him, like him being a champion for comics has always been like a big aspect of what he does.
Yeah.
It just so happens that he happens to do comics himself. But the one thing in talking about him, he'll big everybody up before he essentially even talks about his own stuff, which is excellent, because that's just the way that he is.
Yeah, no, it's not an act. That's just,
no, that's him.
That's him. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, in introducing this, I can imagine how the scripting for every single panel and page must have went, because there's so much detail that's pretty much brought out to this. It almost seems like you could have wrote this as a prose novel as opposed to a comic itself. Now, going into it, like basically, I know you were a part of the Milestone Initiative, like how you basically brought this out. Was there a lot more detail, like basically not that didn't make it into the book? that you would have liked to?
Yeah, I mean, it's always tricky because I think with any project, you're kind of, you got to decide what doesn't make the cut, right? You're always kind of trying to figure out this is really cool, but like it doesn't fit here, or like, I really like this, piece of dialogue, but it's a little too long, or, certain things like that. And for us, one of the hardest things was which historical figures to include in the book, because we didn't want to bog it down where we're just throwing all these people at you one after the other and you don't really
Yeah,
have a chance to like sit with them and get to know them. But we also didn't want to just like give you the hey, person that you've read about in the textbook, or like the first Google search that comes up. Like we wanted to kind of dive deeper into Black history and present some historical figures that maybe aren't top of mind for a lot of people. And so we had some conversations just kind of about, all right, we've got, these people, and like how can we best present them in the book. Obviously, like Melvin is using their knowledge and ability, so it has to make sense within the plot of the story why he's contacting these people.
yeah,
But then at the end it was just like, man, I've got like this whole list of folks that I was like, man, if we're fortunate enough one day to do more, like there's so many people that could have been a part of the story that we would still love to include. So
yeah, yeah. You almost feel like that there could be like a deluxe edition of many more characters that could be brought out to light. So, also in that same context, like, how did you decide which historical figures and basically who did the research? Was it all you, or did you reach out to somebody that possibly might have been a historian of people that you might wanted to grab onto, who to incorporate, especially those that are kind of like less commonly highlighted in mainstream
mm.
narratives?
Yeah, I mean it was me, mostly
Okay.
just looking it up and doing the research. Which, I mean, as a writer, that's one of the things I do really enjoy, anyway. So it wasn't like a burden, but it was still kind of, a little bit tricky just in terms of okay, I've got information, but I also want to verify information, make sure that my information is correct. Because again, these are real people, so I don't
Yeah.
want to put anything in there that's either incorrect or misleading. And then on top of that, like, for example, somebody like Bill Pickett, who was the first Black rodeo star, like if we were looking for somebody who could kind of help inspire Melvin and who, had connections to, rodeo stuff, cowboy stuff. Like there's so many different people to choose from, so it was a little bit of like, how do we whittle down who of this group of people do we want to go with? And so I think, with the research, I did my best, in terms of just like being very diligent about, kind of selecting people, but also, again, it's tricky because there were a lot of people that I was like, man, I wish I could just kind of like shoehorn you in here somewhere,
Hmm.
but I think I'm very happy with the people that we selected. And, one of the most rewarding parts about the book being out in the trade is that we did get to include a lot of extra information in the back of the book.
Yeah.
And so, if you're reading it and you're like, oh, I want to know more about, this person, that person, like you could flip to the back and, read a little bit more of an extended biography. And even from there, then go on and learn some more, at local library or, internet search or whatever. So,
Right. Almost like a bibliography in the back,
hmm.
basically, detailing like certain other works of theirs that you could possibly like read through in
Yeah.
order to get in touch with those people. There had to be a sense of responsibility, definitely pressure in depicting those real historical figures. Now, in the aspect of basically putting the book out, did you happen to reach out to any of the families and be like, hey, I actually like put this person in the book. Would you like to read it?
Yeah, it's tricky because I mean, there's some people who it's like are very still like taking care of like the family legacy.
Yeah.
And there's some people where it's just like, not like the family legacy like died out, but it's just like they're not in the public eye, you know what I mean? So
Hmm.
it's like I don't know how to get in touch with
Right, right, right,
you
right, right.
because like I'm referencing like for example like Jean-Louis Michel, who was like the greatest sword fighter of the 19th century. Like I don't
I wouldn't
know
know.
his family, where to start with stuff like that.
Mhm.
But again, I mean, we really did our best to be not just respectful, but to like really show why these people are important in the context of history. So we haven't heard from any of the families, but we really hope that, if they do read it and, they want to reach out, that they feel like we did justice to their family.
Okay. Now when we're talking about the main character here well, there's actually a few main characters, but with Melvin Waring, both eccentric artists and probably the hero of the story per se because of the literal superpower that he's basically using.
Mhm.
What makes him uniquely suited in this journey? Because he's fresh off of surgery. He's not at his best of health, and he's kind of like with June, his wife, is more of like the emotional crutch for him.
Hmm.
How?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was going to say, yeah, I think Melvin is a very interesting protagonist just because of all those things that you listed. He's not the kind of person that you would think of initially as the hero of a story, and that's one of the reasons that I really wanted to put him in the forefront because I think, one, he's an older hero, which a lot of people have commented on, like, oh, like what made you want to put like an older person, at the front of the story.
Yeah.
And I think, part of that is we don't see it as much, but specifically in terms of it being a book about history, like in and being in touch with, a longer ancestral lineage, like having Melvin be at the center of it, he's somebody who is, he's not going to die anytime soon.
Right.
But it is like you as you get older, you start to think about that. What is my legacy? What am I leaving behind?
Hmm.
And what am I passing off to the next generation of people? So it is kind of on his shoulders in terms of like, all right, when I'm gone, when I'm not here anymore, what did I leave behind? What can people take from my life? And as they move forward in their life. And so that was one of the things that I was thinking about with him. Another thing is him being very much, based off of jazz artist Thelonious Monk,
Mm.
and his wife being based off of Thelonious's wife, Nellie Monk, and just kind of how, if you know anything about Thelonious Monk, he was a very eccentric artist and like all about the music to the extent that like terrible in interviews, terrible in like any kind of like public facing
Hmm.
situation just because he was not interested. He did not want to talk to people. He did not want to be interviewed. He did not want to be famous. He just wanted to do his music, right? And Melvin is a lot of that same way where he doesn't want to go on an adventure. He doesn't
Yeah.
want to do any of these things, but he's kind of forced into it and pulled into it. And I feel like that kind of makes him more relatable in a lot of ways. Because I mean, as much as we love reading stories, I don't think any of us would want to be pulled into an adventure that's like being ripped out of our life and forced to do, kind of all of these crazy things. And so you see as the story kind of goes along, he starts to become a little bit more comfortable in that role, but also is learning to lean on the people around him, whether that be Mirren, whether that be June, and kind of, coming to be more accepting of who he is, and not as kind of caught up in a lot of the stuff going on in his head. So I thought, it'd be a very interesting character who's not, the one who's rushing into the action, but is more so kind of having to be pulled into it or unwillingly going into it, but does it anyways because it's the
Yeah.
right thing to do. It's what he's got to do.
No, and I think I see that wholeheartedly in the relationship that you kind of built between Melvin and June because they're more so anchoring the story. Now,
Mhm.
how did you ensure that like the emotional component stayed central amid all of the sci-fi spectacle? Because they get separated at one point in
Yeah.
time because obviously Mirren has basically told him that people in the neighborhood have been disappearing. And then
Mhm.
the whole central like conflict that basically happened so far, it's kind of like the epicenter of how this pretty much starts is that he wakes up one morning and June's just not there. So
Yeah.
obviously, you think about a loved one just suddenly disappearing. It's enough to drive anybody crazy.
Hmm.
But yet also in the same context, Mirren is more so the thread between the both of them.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, she's one of my favorite characters in the story just because I think, like she represents, like you said, that connection between the both of them, but also, for Melvin, there's a scene where they're driving together and, she starts to get on his nerves and he's
Hmm.
kind of like, pretty much over it, because he really only deals with June. Like he's not good at dealing with other people.
Yeah.
And so, when he kind of blows up at her and she is kind of laying her emotions bare to him, he has that moment of, realization of like, oh no, like she's like me.
Yeah.
We're kind of the same. She's on the opposite end, I'm more interior, she's more exterior, but like we actually have a lot more in common. And like, I should be protecting her. I should be taking care of her. I should be looking out for her. Cause she does look up to me,
Yeah.
and like, it's kind of that mentor relationship. And on the reverse side with June, she can kind of see that Mirren is good for Melvin. I mean, even if he doesn't really want her hanging around, like it's good for him to have that relationship with somebody who has that kind of energy and is really excited about what they're doing, and kind of needs that mentorship. And so Mirren is a lot of fun to write just because she is so excitable and is so, like she wants the adventure. She is the one that's
Yeah.
like, let's go do this crazy stuff. And Melvin's always like, please just let's go home and be done with it. But I think that's kind of anytime you have characters who are kind of in opposition to each other, not necessarily like narratively, but just like personality wise or like just their general like way that they approach life and approach things. I think it's always fun to kind of just throw them at each other and see what happens.
Yeah, because if you figure there's somebody like of a certain age that might be a little bit
Hmm.
older, they might look at the role of youth as very dismissive.
Hmm.
And obviously, in this particular story, you see somebody of Melvin's age and somebody of Mirren's age. Intergenerational connection playing in story themes, especially due to the fact of somebody that's kind of like set in their ways. So Mirren is
Yeah.
kind of like a constant interruption. And
Mm.
what you were talking and no, like I remember that situation of him blowing up in the car, and it's like she's looking for the connection as well.
Yeah.
For the most part, that's been like the portion of the story that you see from like page 2. Like the second she sees him in the pharmacy, she's drawn to Melvin like this entire time, and all that she's looking for is like a little bit of a response. That's all.
Yeah.
Just talk back. Like
Yeah.
if I'm giving, can I receive something?
Right.
Like
Right.
at most. So like having that aspect brought out to have that dynamic to where you have somebody of an older age and somebody of a tremendously younger age, and then also when you get into the latter issues of the book to where June of course sees Mirren and she's a lot older,
Hmm.
and that brings a whole new segment to the story that a lot of people don't necessarily expect.
Yeah. And I think that again was another fun element of like, all right, we've got her here, in this younger age, and she's like, again, very excited, not quite sure of who she is yet.
Hmm.
And then we see her in the future, and she's with June, and it's like, oh, like she's kind of a similar person, but she's kind of gotten more of this confidence. She's kind of gotten more of like, that desire to take action, and their relationship as well, where um like June is very much just happy to see somebody that she knows and
Yeah.
somebody that is like, able to help her. But I think too, when you think about the situations, you're working in a more corporate space where it feels kind of like you are just a cog in the machine.
Yeah.
And like Mirren is very much not that. Like she's very much not somebody that would fit in that world. And so even like seeing June in that situation kind of like wakes her up, like out of like, oh, wait a minute, like, before I got stuck in this job, like I had a dream, like I
Yeah.
wanted to do something, and like, I kind of lost that, but now like June is here, kind of reawakening that in her. And so, again, another fun way to kind of invert those relationships, just because I think, like you said, Mirren is that connection between both of them. And, even though June and Melvin are different people, I think their relationship with Mirren is very much the same in that, like, they come to see her as kind of like a surrogate, daughter, somebody that they really do want to like find the best for and, protect as much as possible. So,
Yeah, for sure. And then the biggest I think the biggest aspect, of course, that comes very early is the MLC, the Modern Living Corporation, and how that's kind of like the big disruption that's happening between the three of them. Now,
mhm.
it's futuristic, dystopia feel. It's eerily relevant.
Yeah.
How much of it is how much of that is speculative versus reflective of like current times?
Yeah, it's interesting because we were working on this back in like 2021. And so like AI was a thing that was, being spoken about and thought about, but it still was very early chat GPT days, very early, like that's the era of the Will Smith eating spaghetti video where it looks like his
Hmm.
hand is like falling apart and like,
Hmm.
so it was just kind of like, okay, this is a thing that we'll see what happens, but there wasn't any real clear, concrete evidence yet. And then as we started to go along, like, things accelerated very quickly. And so, just thinking about even back then, like, a lot of the conversations around AI are not necessarily just it doing things for us, but even more so like in terms of like corporate situations, like giving it a lot of responsibility to like it'll do the numbers for you, it'll like do the staffing for you, it'll do all this other stuff for you, and taking a lot of the human elements out of it. And if you just took that to like the furthest extent of like AI runs the business, like AI is going to run the business like a cold machine. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's not going to be thinking about people. It's not going to be thinking about, it's only going to be thinking about the bottom line and how much money it can make. So whatever it has to do that, that's what it would do. Right. And so, when you're in a situation where you're trying to, play around and have it be, like a warning of sorts, sure, but also like, I think a lot of the conversations around AI are in a way where I find it interesting in the way that it's marketed to you, where like a lot of the commercials are like, are you not good at your job? Like, did you forget to do your
Yeah.
report? Like, did you, did you forget your like child's birthday or, like,
Hmm.
and it starts to like,
We won't forget.
yeah.
It's
And
kinda
it seems like, well, it kind of feels like, they're giving you something, it's kind of like, this is a gift for you. Like you don't think so much,
yeah.
about life and the things around you. Um, and even, we see at the end, right, where Mitchell, the AI, is kind of talking to June and Melvin, and he's like, well, you're getting high and mighty on me, but people really don't care as long as their Amazon package is delivered within the hour. Like
Mhm.
people really don't care, as long as everything is going according to plan, as long as everything is chugging along, like nobody's really
Right.
paying attention to what's happening underneath, right? And you're seeing,
Yeah.
people are burning down, factories and things because they're like, we need to live, like
Mhm.
if you keep cutting the human element out of it, there's going to be consequences in that way. And so I think for this story, it is about like partially the dangers of AI, but also I think in terms of Melvin's, um, kind of like reckoning with it. We have a lot of conversations about art and about Black art and about like how, as artists, there is a responsibility in terms of like the way that you create your art and the way that you share your art, but also that like it's a human experience, right? Like
Yeah.
art is not something that is like you could replicate it, you know what I mean? Like Andy Warhol's whole thing was just like make me like 60 tomato cans, like tomato soup cans, you know what I mean?
Yep.
Like it's the repetitive nature of it. But at the same time, like that there's still a human element to it. There's still a human thought to it. There's still art is communication, right?
Yeah.
Art is a language. It's how we talk to each other. And so what's being communicated if we're not involved in that, right? Like what's being communicated if we're not the ones doing the talking, you know what I
Yeah.
mean? So like
For
I
sure.
think that's for Melvin, that's another big element of it is like, he is it his art may not always be perfect, but it's his and it's his expression that he's putting out there. And so to have a corporation, this AI corporation basically trying to like commodify and co-opt, his art is like,
Yeah.
the biggest danger for him is just like, how do I keep what's mine?
Yeah. As far as that answer, a couple things that I kind of like took out of that because there was the thread, of course, that you talked about where it was like AI and efficiency versus humanity. And then
Hmm.
there's also the component of culture, where AI
Hmm.
can't necessarily copy culture. You know, everything that Black culture has invented, contributed to, or created can't necessarily be duplicated by a robot. And
Right.
then where, Mitchell's whole argument is just like, well, I can just make things happen on a whim and make production better. Where basically like Melvin's like more so referring to the fact that there's certain things that you can't copy.
Right.
Yeah, that's the way that I looked at it, because the idea of a sentient corporation, yeah, it might be fascinating, but what does it represent symbolically?
Absolutely. Well, and I mean, even to that extent, like a lot of the things that we have, whether it be scientific, whether it be artistic, are mistakes. Somebody
Yeah,
messed up. Somebody was trying to do something and ended up doing something else. You know what I mean? if
yeah,
if the machines are so efficient that they only are programmed to do the one
one
thing,
thing.
they're just going to keep doing that thing, and they might do that thing very well, but they're never going to stumble into something else. They're never going to like accidentally come up with a new way of doing things or a new way of seeing things. And I think that's very much the value of humanity, is that, even in our failures, to accomplish our goals, we might mess around and do something completely different, which
Yeah,
is also like a value. So like even the mistakes that we make, can contribute, to culture, can contribute to, art and science and all these different things, in a way that if everything was automated, like you said, you get your package on time, but like what else,
yeah.
know?
And even from the concept of efficiency, efficiency is almost like a cover up for perfection.
Mm,
Like
right.
I used to collect a lot of baseball cards, and sometimes I would get an error card. And it turns out now an error card with somebody else's face on it, with somebody else's name on top, might be a little bit more money than
Mm.
the one that was actually perfect in the first place. Like
Right.
you might get a Shaquille O'Neal card, and it just so happens it's Tree Rollins on the front, him
Right.
dunking. That's an error, but ultimately they're like, oh, you found that pack. There was only like
Yeah.
three of those that we messed up on, and you know
Mm.
what? Since you do have that, it just so happens that the actual value of that error that we made just so happens to be a little bit more than that Shaquille O'Neal card that was absolutely perfect that we did about 1 million of. You
Right.
know,
Right. Absolutely.
yeah. So I look at the fact also that the book, we talked about the comedy aspect. The book mixes a lot of absurd humor with heavy themes.
Hmm.
There's a certain thing, of course, with a lot of writers, they commit to tone. And how
Right.
did you calibrate that tone so that neither undermines the other?
Absolutely. I think, um, like you said, as a writer, you really want to be able to find, the tone that fits the story. You
Hmm.
don't want to do anything that's going to throw your reader off, or like 1 minute or having a zany adventure, the next minute it's like super dramatic, the next minute it's like a horror movie, the next minute it's like, because you got to find that center to the story. And so one of the things I looked at in particular was Everything Everywhere All at Once, which
Yeah.
was a movie that like I think perfectly balanced a lot of that just bouncing around, where like here's this absurdist comedy happening, here's this like really technical science fiction story happening, here's this really dramatic relationship between like mother and daughter happening,
Hmm.
and they're all flowing together. You're never kind of bouncing off one to the other. It's like this actually segues perfectly from one thing to the next. And so, um, anytime, even if you're thinking about horror movies, like there's a lot of horror movies that use comedy to
Hmm.
kind of lighten those moments, because like if it was just people getting killed over and
Yeah.
over again,
It's
like
one
that
dimensional.
might be a lot, but like sometimes it's like, some of the later Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street movies are out, like basically like horror comedies, because it's
Yeah.
just like what's the most absurd way we could kill somebody, in this movie. And so
Jason with the
uh
sleeping bag. Yeah.
yeah.
Beating her like a baseball bat against a tree. I thought that was hilarious.
Right. And so it's like how the balance of those two things, sometimes you're like, well, that's not going to work, but then, you see it and you're like, oh, okay, like maybe this does work. Maybe you can get away with that.
Right.
And for me, again, it's my first creator owned work. I really just wanted to take the biggest swing possible and really just like put everything on the page. And so there was that balance of like, I don't want to steer it too far in one particular direction, because then again, you can kind of get caught in that. And then when you try to, turn into another direction, it's like, wait, what's happening? Why are we going this way?
Mhm.
So, balancing some of the comedy with like, like the Par for One, or some of the other like products that MLC is selling,
Yeah.
along with like um, some of the more sweet or like romantic moments between Melvin and June,
Mhm.
between like, Mirren not knowing how to drive a car, but now she's in a car chase, to like, all these different things that I think felt in character, which is maybe the most important thing, right? Like if it feels like this is what the character would do or say, even if it's like, oh, they're making a joke here, but it's like that's, Mirren is like super anxious. So like she uses humor to kind of mask when she's feeling, that anxiety, or like, Melvin isn't like funny, like making jokes, but he's funny like in his reactions to things,
Oh
right? And
yeah.
so, like that finding those moments where it's like, well, yeah, Melvin wouldn't be like quipping right now, but he would kind of be making a face, or like,
Mhm.
kind of like disinterested in something. So,
Even the first time that he made like his first recall, where he basically
yeah,
started to was channel the swordsman. Basically,
yeah,
having that metal pipe. Nobody knew that he was going to basically like turn into a swordsman with a HVC pipe and just kill a
right,
bunch of drone robots. I thought that portion was a little bit funny. So
right,
because
yeah,
Mirren's looking at it, she's like, I didn't know you could fight like that. So that's a
yeah.
portion of it that kind of like came out of nowhere.
And then he throws his back out, because he's like,
Exactly.
I
Oh,
wasn't supposed to be doing
he's laying on a pile of trash afterwards. He's just like,
it.
man, come on. Exactly. So the series, of course, it juggles multiple timelines, ideas, genres. What was the biggest challenge in constructing it to make it cohesive?
Yeah, I think what we really wanted to do was, one, find that through line, which for us was the Melvin and June romance, right? Like,
Yeah,
as if we could keep coming back to that in some way, no matter what was going on, it felt like we had something for readers to hold on to, and for us as a creative team to hold on to always have that center that we could follow through the story, no matter if they're in the future, or, Melvin is using his powers and, traveling to the past or wherever he's going, whatever's going on. Like that connection between them felt like the strongest part of the story for us. And so having that be the centerpiece allowed us to kind of play around and do a lot of different crazy things. We've got, an issue 4, where they're kind of just going back and forth between Melvin and June's entire relationship. And so that's like we're in their memories, kind of traveling through the course of their life. Um, in single issues, we might jump back and forth between, what Melvin is doing and what June is doing.
mhm,
We have like, again, crazy like martial arts sequences or car chases, or, all kinds of things going on. And I think no matter what was happening, like I was saying, like we never really wanted to lose that connection between them, and, always have those historical elements as well, and not make them feel like we just kind of like force them in,
yeah,
but like they're relevant to the story. They're helping to move the plot forward. And so, I'm somebody who enjoys science fiction, but I don't think too hard about it. You know what I mean? Like I don't
yeah,
watch a science fiction in a movie and I'm not like, how does that technology work? Or like, where did they get that, weapon from? Or like,
right.
I'm just kind of like, if you tell me that's how it works, then I guess that's how it works. I guess that's what it does, So I'm never like thinking too hard about it. And even one of my biggest influences for the book as well is Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut. And that's just basically like a character becomes unstuck in time, and that's all you know. And there's
Mhm.
no explanation for
Nah,
it, or like
he's just there.
that, that's just what's happening. So, like similar vibes here, where it's just like, and there it is, and now the story happens. So, like not wanting to get too in the weeds with the details, because I think sometimes that can be good, if you really are building out a world and building out, a lot of the nitty gritty of things, but at the same time, you can also get lost in that,
Mhm.
as a storyteller, and then, you kind of lose track of the important character relationships. And so, by trying to ground it in character and ground it in this relationship, and then feeling free to play around, that kind of core element where we can do crazy things, as long as we're always kind of coming back to that. So I think that was our guiding principle, was always making sure that, whatever direction we're going, we're always kind of moving towards the reuniting of Melvin and June.
Yeah, because I guess there's a lot of people that have I guess a more one dimensional construct of what sci-fi is. They always think it's like this big aspect of world building. Like the first thing that they think
Mm,
of is like Star Wars or
hmm
Star Trek, and then they're thinking of like all those elements of technology that basically are going to get put into this, and they're not thinking of a more centered, down to earth type of storyline that basically is basically put together in sort of like a different aspect of it. Now,
Yeah.
there's um there's also even the fact that Adigan, as far as like putting this together, and as far as like the tone that he was able to put together, were there sequences in building this storyline, inherently sci-fi and inherently Afrofuturism, basically what you wanted to build as far as like a concept? Were there visual sequences where the art expanded or even changed the original intent of what you were writing?
Oh, absolutely. I think, one of the best things about just, personal relationship and creative relationship with Adigan is that it feels like we're very much on the same page.
Yeah.
Like it's always nice to find somebody that you can kind of build that shorthand with. And, if you throw an idea at them, you can maybe not even guess what they're going to do, but trust them that whatever they come back to you with is going to be in the same, field of what you were thinking. And so
Mhm.
me and him had, a good number of conversations before we even started, like, doing any art or, moving forward with stuff, just about what we wanted characters to look like. We wanted the overall look and tone of the book to be. I sent him like a music playlist of, like, this is what I'm listening to when I'm writing it. Like, this is like, maybe you could listen to it when you're
Okay.
drawing, that we could kind of like connect in that way. And so I think one of the great things working on this is just kind of seeing, in the like first issue and a half, it wasn't even that Adigan was holding back, but it was like, I think we were still kind of feeling out, okay, Jordan's like, pushing me in this direction, what am I going to do with that? How am I going to move with that? One of the first things he did was he added Petunia the panda
Yeah.
as like Mirren's sidekick. So that wasn't in the script. That was just a thing that he just put in there, and I saw it and I was like, okay,
Yeah.
like let's follow this. Let's see what happens from there. And I think just even that little bit of like me giving him that trust and responding to his ideas built up as we went on, and then you can kind of feel as things continue to go. It's like he's cooking. He's like, all right, I get it now. I get,
Mhm.
where we're going with this. I get what these characters are like, and you can kind of see him just throwing like all kinds of crazy stuff at it, like the the martial arts sequence that Melvin has, later in the story
Yeah.
for the script. I never want to kind of inhibit an artist in the way of just like, a fight sequence or a chase or something like that, where I'm like, all right, and here's everything that happens, and like do that verbatim, as much as I'm like, here's what's happening, but like there's room to maneuver around and play with it. And so, I sent him actual clips of both of the martial artists, like them in action, and like some of the moves that they did in real life. And it was like, we got 4 or 5 panels here. Like, look at this. Think about how
Yeah.
you want Melvin to move, kind of pull from this, and to throw it in there. And then when he came back with it, I was like, that looks awesome. That's
Right.
so cool. And so I feel like, one of the beautiful things about Adigan's work is he can do that, and then he can draw Melvin and June's first date, and then he can do like, Melvin riding a horse getting chased by, robot dogs. And then he can have this very intimate moment between, Melvin and Mirren. And like all of it feels like it's one piece, and not like, him kind of having to shrink himself or, do things out of his wheelhouse. Like he can do all of that. And
Right.
so it was great to kind of be able to throw all those things at him, and him not only be up for the challenge, but then, like you said, kind of exceed some of the things even that I had thought of, where, you know, I just really trusted him by the end of it to like, if I throw this at you, I know not only can you do it, but like you're gonna do your thing. You're going to add, what you do to it. So it's going to be, just come out really special. And I think it did.
For sure. For sure. Now I'm actually kind of interested into the Sonic translation of the playlist that you sent them. So now what did you send them?
So in my mind, Ancestral Recall is a very jazz based um feel to it. And so,
Hmm.
there's like some John Coltrane on there, some Max Roach on there, some like more modern artists, like Shabaka Hutchins and Ezra Collective, and just like a lot of music that is like a spiritual kind of jazz, like a Pharoah Sanders,
Yeah.
and people like that that kind of feel like, the music is is almost like a rapturous feel, like it's moving, like you feel like you're being possessed by, the spirit of the music. And I felt like that was really, it's what's happening to Melvin. But it's also kind of like this feeling where, sometimes listening to music, specifically from artists that are no longer with us, it still feels like I said before, like artist communication. It still feels like they're
Oh yeah.
speaking to us and communicating with us. And so, even though they're not here anymore, the music is here. Like Sun Ra's music is here, and you can still listen to it, and you can get the message that he was trying to give you through that. And so, I was grabbing a lot of stuff like that because I felt like it was very much in conversation with our book, and wanted to again give Adigan like some of the things that I can we can have a conversation and talk about it, but like with the music you can feel it too, like you
Yeah.
can kind of hear it, and it gives you another dimension to think about when you're working on it.
It's funny that you brought up Sun Ra and Pharoah Sanders, who basically had a lot of interviews to where they were talking about their music being more so cultural communication. I'm speaking to you,
Hmm. Right.
but I'm not speaking to you through me. I'm speaking to you through our ancestors. Ancestors.
Right.
It's Sun Ra basically his whole band dressed up in almost this Afro-futuristic way.
Yeah.
And even as far as like the Ezra Collective, they've been interchanging in a lot of like musical genres. The recently from like house music and EDM, which are more
Hmm.
so incoherently black genres if people actually like
Right.
did their studying of them, and with the mixture of the communication that they're adding in with their horns and everything like that, I can see exactly what you wanted to kind of like stabilize going from writer to artist. Exactly,
Yeah.
like kind of like the theme that you wanted to go through.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm a very visual thinker, when
Hmm.
I'm writing. So, I'm trying to kind of think about how characters look, or, their expressions, and the music kind of gives me another emotional element and layer to it. If you're thinking about it like scoring a film,
Hmm.
like we're not going to get the actual music in the comic.
Hmm.
Um, but when I'm working on it, I can kind of at least kind of put a little bit of that emotion from the music that I'm listening to into the scene, and hopefully it translates through.
Definitely. Now, have there been conversations that you sparked about Black history, art, cultural legacy, and better yet, what conversations do you hope that it sparks?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the great things about this book so far, just in terms of people's reception to it and like the conversations I've had with people about it, even with non-black people, who
Hmm.
who read it and were kind of like, hey, I didn't know these people. A lot of black people were like, I didn't know these people. You know what I mean? So it's great that like
Yeah.
that element is there, so that people are getting, a fuller picture of history, but also that there's a scene where Melvin and June are at an art gallery and they're getting interviewed by a critic, and the critic asks what might seem like a innocuous question about like, oh, you've painted a lot of things centered around like black culture and community, like, where you're going to paint something else. And Melvin's kind of like, no, like this is what I do. And the interviewer is ready to move on, but June's kind of like, well, hold on a minute. Like, what are you saying with that question? Like, what are you asking me?
Right.
And there's a very famous interview that Toni Morrison did with Charlie Rose, where, he's talking to her about, some of the criticisms that she received in that same vein of like, oh, she's done a lot of, work and writing about, Black culture and Black experience, Black womanhood. Well, when is she going to write, as critics would say, about like the real issues?
Hmm.
And Toni Morrison's response was like, am I not doing that? Like,
Yeah.
what is more valid about me writing about, white people than about writing about what I know in my history and my culture? And I think for Melvin, and just, one of the elements I wanted to explore in this book is that, for a lot of Black artists, it can feel a little like you're kind of boxed in, in certain
Hmm.
elements, right? Because like the true expression oftentimes feels like it doesn't penetrate, a larger mainstream consciousness. Like if you're doing work, I remember a lot of interviews where Dwayne McDuffie would say, I would work on a book and then suddenly it would become a Black book.
Yeah.
Like I did Justice League and people are like, oh, just Dwayne McDuffie put Vixen on the Justice League and he was like the editor did that. I didn't do that. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
I'm just writing the book. But now that I'm on the book, it's a Black book and now has a different connotation
Right.
than if somebody else was writing it. And so, like, those conversations about not only what is the value of Black art, but how do we begin to see ourselves and the work outside of the white gaze and outside of these larger things that look down on it. Because, even some of the historical figures that I include, like somebody like Kitty Knox, who was one of the first Black women, cyclists, invited to
Hmm.
be part of these cycling leagues. Like somebody might look at that and say, well, what did she do? Like she
Yeah.
rode a bike, you know what I mean? But it's like,
Hmm.
but look at what she did though. You know
Yeah.
what I mean? She was in a space where people were telling her no, that you can't be there, and she didn't take no for an answer. You know what I mean? She was following her joy and her passion, and she made it real, and so that's not nothing, that counts for something. There's value in that. And so, one of the things that I want people to take away from the book is that, Black history, Black culture, I think it not only is American culture, but the importance of how we look at it and how we value it, um, I think should be equitable with everything else. You know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
there's nothing that Black people in this country haven't touched and haven't been a part of. And so, like when we have these narrow views, even of ourselves, when we're looking at it from our perspective and we're looking at certain things and kind of weighing them against like, oh, but is this artist as good as like Vincent van Gogh, or is this writer as good
Right.
as like Stephen King, or like these other people? And it's like, well, I think their value is their value. What they're
Hmm.
doing has its own value. And you don't necessarily not even need to like measure it against other people, but like its value is inherent. It exists on its own. It's like we don't need to constantly be moving the goalpost or trying to find ways to like, make it seem like the work that we're doing is like trying to put its importance ahead of itself, where we're constantly fighting with a more mainstream viewpoint of what art is or what is valuable, or even like what history is valuable, right? Like I think the more control we take over it and the more that we assert what we value as a community, as a culture, like that's just going to rise up. It's going to become undeniable. So
For sure. And I would necessarily take a part of that because of the storyline of basically where you brought this to was in the um almost in the subgenre of Black indie comics. And
hmm.
obviously there's been I saw you talking about it on For All Nerds, to where the medium of Black indie comics, of course, has been the topic of discussion as of
Hmm.
recently. That's been extremely huge. There's a broader movement that's been attributed to it, and the thing is I feel like even sometimes the negative base of some of the storylines have been happening lately have sort of drawn into people to be like, well, what indie comics are you talking about? I've never heard of these ones
Yeah.
before. Like maybe I should give them a look. And
Right.
but the thing is, it sucks that we have to get into a space to where people are talking negatively towards one another in order for the notation of be like, oh, there's Black indie books out there. It was like there's always been Black indie books out there. It's
Right.
like
Right.
I don't know why arguments all of a sudden just got you interested all of a sudden. So like as far as like, do you see this story as part of a broader movement in comics?
Yeah, I mean, I hope so, because I think in terms of um, when you look at places like Image, places like Boom, places like Dark Horse, like we see a lot of Black indie comics being done, through Kickstarter
Hmm.
and other
Tons.
spaces, which is great, but it's like there's enough space for all of us, and not just Black comic creators, but like comic creators. Like there's enough
Yeah.
space for all of us, at all of these different places. And when you get into a mindset of competition, right, where it's like, well, it's either me or you, right? Like either I get the opportunity or you do,
Hmm.
um I don't when I say I don't view other people as competition, I don't mean that like, I'm better than everybody or
Yeah.
like nobody can do what I do. But I don't view other people as competition as like, why can't we all eat? Like
Yeah.
I'm not trying to take a spot away from anybody, or I'm not trying to push anybody out. Like you were talking about Joseph Village, like Joseph lifts everybody up. And I think
Hmm.
if we could all be more like that, where, it's understandable, right? Like I think everybody, we've all got a little bit of our own ego. We've all got a little bit of
Hmm.
our own, drives and aspirations. And, but again, I think going back to when we were talking about Black art, a lot of the times we're kind of forced into those positions where it feels like where only one of us is going to get to the finish line. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? So we got to push each other out the way just to make sure that, we get there, as opposed to like somebody get to the finish line and then like hold the door open. So like everybody can run
Yeah.
through, and I look around, and again, like there's so many talented people who should be working at Marvel, should be working at DC, should be working at these other places, but really should just be working, should just be
Yeah.
doing comics, and so I'm always grateful to, move in spaces and talk to people like a Stephanie Williams, like a David Walker, like, a lot of my fellow milestone folks like, Morgan Hampton, Julio Anta, people who are very much so like trying to open spaces for people to come
Yeah.
through because like uh again, when you think about the larger corporate interest of things, right? Like Marvel made a Black Panther movie and they didn't really want to do it, but they're like, okay, people are saying,
Hmm.
this is a very white comic universe, so like let's do a Black Panther movie. It turns out to be the highest grossing movie they've ever done,
Yeah.
up until that point. And so it's like, oh, that makes money too. Like we can,
Right.
we can do that, And so I think, unfortunately, the way that a lot of things work is that, the money has to be flowing in that direction. That gets people's attention. That gets publishers' attention. That
Yeah.
that makes people say, oh, how can I be a part of that,
Hmm.
right? And so the more that we're supporting each other, the more that we're kind of lifting each other up, and obviously, sure, financially, but even if you don't have the money to buy all the comics,
Yeah.
like as long as you're engaging with people, you're, recommending the books to people, you're supporting people, however you can, I think, like you said, that spotlight, it's big enough for all of us to
Yeah.
shine in. And so as long as we're all kind of trying to move towards a general direction, right? Like artistic endeavors are strange only in that like you can want it as bad as you want.
Hmm.
Who says if you're going to get it? You know what I mean? Like that's
Yeah.
just one of the unfortunate things. Like luck has a lot to do with where people end up. But as long as we're all moving in, a unified direction of like, all right, this is something that we feel like needs to happen. This is something that we feel like, people are asking for it. People do want it. People ask about Milestone all the time. You know what I mean? People
Yeah.
ask about those characters all the time. They still want to see something like that. And so the demand is there. It's just about how can we together push forward so that, like you said, when people say, oh, there's Black indie comics, oh, there's Black like horror comics and fantasy comics and like
Happens all the
historical, like
time.
all this stuff, it's like where can I find that at? Like being the avenue, being the way that you can push forward, and thinking about, okay, I can get this opportunity, absolutely, but also like, how can I help somebody else get this opportunity as well? Because if they're, moving forward, I'm moving forward, we're all moving forward.
Yeah, for sure. Because if you think about it, even in the larger effect, the larger aspect of things, um, there's not that many, not that many black writers that are out there doing comics. There's not that many black artists
Hmm.
out there doing comics that are like household names. You know, the
Yeah.
you said most of the few that are basically out there right now, they're doing basically a lot within the mainstream two, the main big two. And then
Yeah.
outside of that, there's so many more, but there's still not that many. So it's like
Yeah.
obviously in the greater landscape of things, especially with black indie comics, you just want to be doing the work. That's it.
Right.
Like my work is out there. It's visible as possible. There is the Rodney Barnes of the world.
Hmm.
There is the Joseph Village of the world. There's and Stephanie Williams, of course, as well. Morgan Hampton. These are like the few that have basically that we see regularly.
All right.
There's so many that are literally behind the cutting room door that you see, of course, a lot on Kickstarter that are in the indie space that are doing tons of work. They're almost on their 10th book. And
Hmm.
nobody, not to say that nobody would know because they keep getting funded and they keep having the idea to
Yeah.
put out more and more issues of this one particular comic that they've been wanting to get out there to the world. Like I think I just had a conversation with the people over at Wiseacre Comics, and obviously they've been publishing tons of stuff recently with a myriad of creators. It's one
Yeah.
person and there's 10 other creators that are attached to it, and they put this out, and then I'll tell somebody about it, and it's like, who? And I'm like, I'm telling you, you got to pay attention. So it's good to have somebody like you on the show, of course, that it has been a part of a Big Two experience with Milestone, and
Hmm.
then taking that whole general effect of that learning experience and putting that towards your own books.
Yeah. I mean, really, there's no benefit to gatekeeping. There's no
No.
benefit to shutting other people out or not sharing the knowledge or not sharing, the opportunities where you can, because I think, um, you know, in life in general, and specifically in creative industries, you're going to go up and then you're going to come down, you know what I
Hmm.
mean? And like the way that you act when you're on the way up is the way that people are going to treat you on the way down, you know what I mean? And so
Yep.
if you treat people like dirt on the way up, when you need a hand on the way down, people are going to watch you go.
Hmm.
And if you were there supported people on the way up, when you're coming down, people are going to hold you up. People are going to say, "Oh, I remember when I was looking for, a cover opportunity and Jordan, threw something my way. Or I
Yep.
remember when I needed an introduction to an editor and, Jordan threw something my way. And now I have a chance to pay that back,
Yep.
and it's not a thing. It's just absolutely like, yeah, come on through. So I think the more that you think about those relationships that you have with people where, it's not transactional, it's not what can I get from you, or what can you give me, as much as it's like, oh, I see what you're doing and it's cool, and I want to help support that, like that kind of energy is going to take you further.
For sure. Now, to bring it on home, if you could pull a Melvin and channel if you could channel a historic figure for a day, who would it be
Ah,
and why?
it's tough, because I feel like I would hope, in the way that Melvin does, I could spend the day with them, and kind of have that communication with them.
Hmm.
And so I'll give you two, if I can cheat and have two,
Sure.
I would be James Baldwin, just because I would love to. He's one of my favorite writers and just one of my favorite thinkers.
Same.
And so, like being able to
Got that.
kind
Got that right there. There you go.
of to be able to just kind of see, I mean, so much of his work is still relevant today. So much of what he was talking about is still relevant today. And so just to be able to kind of feel, that energy and have a chance to maybe, Monstar a little bit of that talent,
Yeah.
and write something for a day,
Pull the energy out of the
uh,
ball.
would be nice. And the other one would be Sun Ra, just because I feel like, that freedom,
Way
like
ahead
Sun
of his
Ra,
time.
way ahead of his time. I mean, like in so many ways created himself,
Hmm.
in a time when black men and black people in general were not allowed to be eccentric in that way, to be, different and kind of, step out of the norm.
Yeah.
And not only did he do it, but like he inspired, generations and generations of people after him to kind of follow that. So, just to kind of feel the music for a day and be able to experience, kind of the way that he approaches things creatively would be incredible. So those are my two.
Or that's what's happening. No, it's funny because I remember watching like a Sun Ra clip where he visited like an elementary school classroom, but he came in like his full
Yeah.
garb, and the kids were asking him, where you from?" And he was like, "I'm from the future." And these kids were like, "What?" And they were like, "Yeah, I'm from the future."
Yeah.
It blew these kids away because it's like, if you think about that time frame, and this was possibly like early 70s and everything like that. He's basically telling a bunch of young black kids, it's like, there's black people in the future. I'm one of them.
Hmm.
It's like,
Yeah.
don't think you can't go that far. I've already been there. And to be honest,
Absolutely.
looking at his work and just looking at the collective of how he would be on stage, you would be like, yeah. If you went to a concert dance, yeah, I'm in the future. It's like
For sure.
being at a P Funk concert, like in the 60s. Like,
Hmm.
I am going to the future. They would say I'm going to the mothership. It's happening.
Absolutely. That's, I think one of the things that I always love when I see black people taking chances and taking opportunities to do things that it's not even that, we're not used to seeing black people do, because like I said, we've done everything and touched everything.
Oh, for sure.
But just that inspiration of like, um specifically at that time, right? When you're thinking about the 60s and the 70s and like the freedom in the music, right? Like
Mm,
that opportunity for however long that concert is going on, to just escape from the
mhm,
world and just be free and live in that moment. And I think there's such an importance in that, even now when, things feel kind of difficult or, hard to hold on to, having that music that you can kind of have that moment with, even if it's just, you're riding in the car to work or, you're
mhm,
winding down at the end of the day, that escape to let you know, like you said, like there is a future and we're there and we have an opportunity to shape it and create it. And so that's one of the things I love so much just about those particular artists who keep pushing those boundaries.
for sure. For sure. Jordan, this has been an excellent talk. I appreciate having a chance to talk about this book. I've been wanting to talk about the book now for about a few months. Obviously,
All right.
getting a trade paperback in my hand, I felt like I needed to just get a bunch off my chest. I had a ton of questions. I appreciate you. I appreciate you answering them for me.
Yeah, absolutely. This has been great. Definitely appreciate you having me on and, anytime you want to talk, I'm here.
Absolutely. So for everybody here at the Facts Project, April 14th, I'm going to say about 13 days ago, Ancestral Recall, the trade paperback book for Ahoy Comics, was released to everybody out there. So if you haven't found either your local comic store, if you got to pull it on Simon and Schuster, wherever you want to find it,
Hmm.
you will be able to find the trade paperback. All 6 issues are compiled into one particular trade paperback for everybody out there. Jordan Clark, has been a pleasure talking with you. Hope we get a chance to do it again. And of course, for everybody out here at the Facts Project, we thank you. We'll see you guys next week. We are out.